Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to my YouTube channel, the Pluriverse. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do, as we go on this journey of unfolding and unraveling and deconstructing the hegemony and reimagining a pluriversal world together. Welcome once again. In today's episode, I want to take you through some of the constructs that have created our hegemonic world and also invite you to hold the vision of a pluriversal world together. Only by holding a vision, reimagining together, collectively, can we co-create a pluriversal world. Are we ready? Let's go. Why a pluriverse? I am continuing the why from the previous episode because I believe that it is important to understand why am I talking about a pluriversal world at all? Why can't we reconstruct and reimagine a new way of living, different possible futures from the current hegemonic paradigm? Why is it important to unravel that paradigm before we can reconstruct a pluriversal world? So stay with me, let's reimagine and let's reconstruct the pluriverse by holding that and also by understanding what is holding us back. So what is a pluriverse? A pluriversal world is made up of varied epistemologies, myriad cosmologies, and many ontologies. It eschews the hegemonic narrative of a construct that we currently have, the Eurocentric construct of a hegemonic world that was imposed as a colonial imperial project. That construct has led to a polycrisis which has devolved into a metacrisis. I have discussed this earlier and I'll discuss this in greater detail later. But before that, I want to delve a little into the leadership that has come out of this hegemonic construct. If we look at the world today, the hegemonic construct, the narrative that was actually created by a clutch of white men, has brought us to a brink not only of a polycrisis, but also of a crisis of leadership. The construct has given rise to a certain construct of leadership, to a certain paradigm of leadership that is meant to uphold the status quo, that is meant to uphold the hegemony, and that is counterproductive to a regenerative, life-affirming planet where everyone can thrive and flourish. So the leadership construct that we have today is predicated upon competition, aggressiveness, arrogance, assertiveness, competitive strategies, outsmarting, the winner takes all, and all the other rest of it that you and I know, that has created a school of leadership for generations, that have created leaders who are not only decentered from their own inner wisdom, but who are also separated from their own selves, from the other, and from nature. So we have leaders who are intricately entangled with the hegemony and who follow the hegemonic paradigm in their own rise towards so-called quote-unquote success, which has evolved into short-termism, which has sort of devolved into quoting growth and development, so-called growth and development, as success measures, while the rest of the planet has burnt, while we have rising planetary level mega crisis in every sphere: social, political, ecological, economic, spiritual, and others. So the leadership crisis has emerged from the hegemonic narrative, and that very leadership crisis is now devolving into the kind of decision making that we are seeing, which has led to the crisis in Gaza, the crisis in Sudan, in Congo, and in many, many other places in the world. So the hegemony requires certain kinds of people, certain kind of leaders who are promoted to power, who are promoted to privilege, and who are focused deliberately on a kind of profit making that is completely actually devoid, I would say, not only of humanity, but also of sanity. If you step back and look at the kind of decision making ruling the world today, it appears psychopathic, pathological, almost insane. And you wonder, why are they taking such decisions? Don't they know? Yes, they do know. But they are meant, the hegemony is designed to benefit a handful of people. The hegemony is designed to create. It is not a fallacy. It is designed to create this kind of world. It is designed to keep certain people in power while completely decimating the rest of the world. It is not a mistake. It is by design that more than half the population in the world are not only hungry but desperate. The more desperate people are, the easier they are to manipulate. The easier they become pawns in the games of hegemony. So the leadership crisis and the hegemonic crisis are closely interlinked. To grow out of this, to come out of this, we need not only to completely reshape and reframe and reform our narratives, but we also need to completely understand that the leadership paradigms of the past will no longer work in the future. In fact, those paradigms are precisely what is holding us stuck in the clutches, in the grip of the hegemony. They are exactly meant to keep the hegemony in place. So we not only need new leaders, we need completely different leadership paradigms arising out of pluriversal narratives and arising not out of Eurocentric hegemony, but from a world that is predicated on togetherness, on connectedness, on interbeing. So the leadership will look extremely different. We'll have facilitative leaders, leaders who are stewards. Today's leadership, unfortunately, cannot even step into that paradigm. They are stuck, they are fossilized. Before we move on, let me talk a little about what this could look like. So the politics of decolonial investigation talks about this as not only not an era of changes, but we are now in a change of era. Daniel Schmachtenberger calls this a phase shift. A change of era is not a transition. It is actually just an explosion. How Walter de Minolo explains it is an explosion where the universal do not transit, do not become pluriversal. It explodes into multipolarity. It explodes into the pluriversality. By explosion, what I think he means, and I mean, is where the old explodes, the fragments and fractures. And the fragments and fractures cannot be reconstituted in the old shape anymore. So while we had an era of rapid changes, where industrial revolution gave way to the internet era to the digital era, to the era of AI, it was still premised on the same narrative. It was still premised upon the same hegemonic Eurocentric narrative. The base narrative was the same, while the constructs on top kept shifting. Internet became AI, and AI became, is becoming, we don't know exactly what, but they premised upon the same narrative. So it was still an era of rapid changes. But when the narrative is blown apart, when the narrative explodes, fragments, fractures, shifts, we go from an era of changes to a complete phase shift, a change of era. and that is an explosion. That is not premised on a linear move anymore. It is a complete phase shift into a completely different period. And to prepare for that period requires us to hold space in this liminality, the space between stories. And holding of that space requires completely different kinds of leaders, very different leadership paradigms, coming from very different narratives, coming from very different worldviews, cosmologies, very different epistemologies and ontologies, where the Western epistemology is taken down to size and becomes just one of many, not the only one, not one that is superior or universal in any sense of the word. It is just one of many cosmologies existing. So what would that look like? An explosion? Yes, we are experiencing that, aren't we? We are seeing the world literally explode in different places. The explosion in Gaza, I would say, is a barometer of how the hegemony is going to explode. It is exploding, and it's not going to go out quietly into the dark night. It is going to go out screaming and shouting in fury, in blood and gore. Let's use this familiar framework from International Futures Forum, the three horizons that Bill Sharp has created. And International Futures Forum, I think this is a very useful framework to hold collectively that the horizon 1, 2, and 3 coexist in this moment, in the now, together. They are synchronously in existence. And horizon 1 is currently trying extremely hard to maintain the status quo through any means possible, through oppression, suppression, war, violence, military-industrial complex, through its leaders, through the leadership choices being made. I mean, today the choices look insane, but it is a desperate attempt to hold on to the status quo, which is horizon 1. But it is not working. It is going out. It is fragmenting. But I'm also saying that there are probably parts of horizon 1 worth conserving. The very fact that I'm coming to you through YouTube is an innovation of arising out of horizon 1. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's hospice gracefully, with honor and dignity, what no longer works, while accepting with gratitude what does work. So let's keep what is worth conserving, but let's not fight with blood, sweat, and tears to keep the hegemony in place, which is what is currently happening. The current Western Eurocentric powers, USA, UK, and the rest, are fighting with their might, with everything, with their military-industrial complex, with their drones, with their war equipments to keep horizon 1 in place. Which is why you see all the blood and the gore and the violence and the war. Which is why you see more wars being planned, whether it is with China, whether it is with Russia. We know a world premised and predicated upon warfare and violence cannot be regenerative, cannot be thriving, cannot flourish, cannot offer peace and security to anyone, anywhere. So, what are some of the horizon 2 actions that are already happening, that are arising out of innovation, out of entrepreneurship? A friend of mine calls them entrepreneurs of hope. Yes, there are. People are marching on the streets. People are putting their bodies on the line. People are showing with their voices, with their actions, with their words, with their silence as well, what they believe in. And horizon 2 actions that are premised upon the future, that are premised upon connectedness, on interbeing, on our ineradicable, indelible interrelatedness and entanglement, are the future visions, are horizon 3 vision holders. Horizon 3 vision holders. Yes, there will be some actions that will be co-opted by horizon 1 to maintain its life, to keep chugging along for some more time. So some actions, some words, some people will get co-opted, but not everything. What gets co-opted will fall in horizon 2 minus. But again, I believe even by co-opting, horizon 1 cannot be prolonged. It is on its way out. By co-opting, what arises out of true integrity, horizon 1 is actually shifting towards horizon 2. And horizon 2 plus actions are pushing us, are creating the spaces required to nurture and nourish and steward the visions of possible futures, pluriversal futures, which is horizon 3. So this is for us to just peg our ideas, our visions, and see where we are. Where do our actions fit? Where do our leadership come from? How can we propel and collectively work towards, through our imagination, towards horizon 3 futures? Because they are all here in the now. We just need to see which are the actions, which are the voices, which are the stories, which are the narratives, and which are the worldviews and cosmologies that are delinking, decoupling, and deconstructing themselves away from the hegemony. So voices disobeying the hegemony are probably horizon 3 voices. So multipolarity. Today, there is a lot of talk about a unipolar world becoming multipolar. Unipolar is another official term for hegemony. And multipolarity is the move that is already happening in the geopolitical space. We can see it. So unipolarity moving or giving way to multipolarity is a specific move towards de-Westernization. It is political, it is nation-state led. It doesn't necessarily challenge the economic narrative of growth. It is still premised upon that narrative. Only, like I've mentioned before, we now have more contenders for the top post. We have more nation states who are probably, in power differentials, who are vying to be the top. But it is definitely a move towards de-Westernization, whereas Eurocentric hegemony tried to maintain the unipolar world predicated on Western power centers. Multipolarity decentralizes the West. It is de-Westernization. Pluriversality is completely different. It is in the sphere of knowing, sensing, believing, being, and is the goal of decoloniality. Decoloniality takes advantage of de-Westernization, but decoloniality unhooks itself from isms, beliefs, ideologies, and state-led power centers, and is premised upon our connectedness on globalism and not the monomyth of globalization. Decoloniality is therefore essentially people-led, story-led, narrative-led, beyond and eschewing all kinds of supremacy and dominance. It is truly democratic, dialogic, and participatory. And therefore it needs people, it needs us, it needs movements to cohere, to give it shape, to nurture and nourish, and to create spaces for the pluriverse to step in. The liminal space between the old and the emerging is where pluriversality can step in. This is just a table to distinguish between multipolarity and pluriversality. However, let me be very clear that these are not binaries. I do not want to fall into the trap of dualism and binaries, which was a very hegemonic thing, where you had the cultured versus the not cultured, and the civilized versus the savage, and the traditional versus the modern, and so on. So this is not multipolar versus pluriversal. It is multipolar and pluriversal. However, there are some distinctive markers that help us to distinguish between multipolarity and pluriversality. But when we bring both together, multipolar and a pluriversal world? Are we looking at geopolitical shifts as well as shifts of within people's imagination, sense making, world sensing, system sensing, storytelling, and then only can we start to re-story, to de-storify the old and re-story the new, to deconstruct the old so that we can reimagine the new, to decouple from the hegemony so that we can describe and do literally, hold space for very different possible futures through a pluriversal world sense and through a pluriversal way of sense making, knowing, learning, believing, and interacting, doing it collectively together. Going back, we are at an apocalyptic moment. Apocalypse, as the Greek root, meant uncovering, disclosure, and revelations. So yes, we are in a space of revelations. The hegemony is unraveling, and the world and the old world order is literally revealing itself to us through the cracks, through the fissures and the fragments. We can now see through it. So through the revelation, we are stepping into a change of era. As the era of changes, rapid changes diminish and a complete phase shift happens, we step into a change of era, and in this liminal space lies potential, possibilities, opportunities, new stories, new movements, and a collective rise of reimagining our possible futures. Paul Hawkins said it beautifully, that we are part of a movement of movements that do not have a male vertebrate in charge, that is arising almost spontaneously, organically, together, collectively, all over the world. And we can see that movement of movements happening even as I speak, right now, everywhere, all at once. Finally, going back to regeneration. A regenerative world is necessarily premised on decolonialism, pluriversality, and is counter-hegemonic. A hegemonic world cannot be regenerative. They are inherently contradictory. They are inherent contradictions. With that, I invite you once again to subscribe, to stay tuned, and join me on this journey of unraveling the hegemony and reimagining a pluriversal world together. I would love to hear your views of a pluriverse. This is just my way of sensing the world. I would love to know more about what you think, what you feel, and how we can collectively bring our voices together to give birth, midwife, very different possible futures. We are all midwives. We are all dreamers, movers, and shakers. So let's dream together. Thank you very much for listening.